The city never truly slept. Its heartbeat was a constant hum of traffic, distant sirens, and the murmur of countless lives entwined within its maze of streets and towering skyscrapers. Amidst the urban sprawl, shadows stretched long, concealing secrets that few dared to uncover. Detective James Jamie Williams moved through the bustling crowd with practiced ease. At 35, his sharp eyes missed nothing, a skill honed from years navigating neighborhoods much like the one he now found himself in. This part of the city was a tapestry of struggle and resilience, where every face told a story of battles fought against a relentless tide of hardship. That morning, James stood at the edge of a graffiti-laden alleyway, the flickering tape of a police barricade dancing in the wind. Officers milled about, their radios crackling with static-laden reports. A sense of unease hung heavy in the air. Detective Williams, a uniformed officer, approached. "The missing kid's name is Tyrone Bennett, 16 years old, last seen right here 2 nights ago." James surveyed the scene. Litter lined the gutters, and the faint smell of refuse mingled with the aroma of street food from a nearby vendor. His gaze settled on something peculiar. A small arrangement on the ground, marked by evidence tags. He crouched down, examining the objects. Peanuts, carefully placed in a perfect circle. "What do we have here?" he muttered. "Strange, isn't it?" the officer commented. "Found them exactly like that." James's brow furrowed. The symbolism was unclear, but the deliberate placement suggested more than mere coincidence. "Make sure these get to forensics," he instructed. "I want a full analysis." Back at the precinct, James met with Kiera Smith, the department's diligent forensic scientist. At 28, she was both brilliant and keenly observant, traits that often proved invaluable. "Got something interesting for you," James said, handing her the bagged peanuts. Kiera examined the contents with a curious smile. "A snack, detective?" "Found at a missing person's last known location," he explained. "Arranged in a circle. Maybe it's nothing, but my gut tells me otherwise." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'll see what I can find." As the day wore on, James delved into Tyrone's background. The boy's file painted a familiar picture: a fractured home life, a mother working multiple jobs, a father absent more often than not. School records showed promise, overshadowed by truancy and minor infractions. It was a story James knew all too well. He visited Tyrone's mother, Mrs. Bennett, whose weary eyes brimmed with worry. "He's a good boy," she insisted, wringing her hands. "Got mixed up with some rough crowds, but he's not bad. Please, you have to find him." "Do you know who he was hanging out with recently? Any new friends?" James asked gently. She hesitated. "He's been spending time with some older kids. I don't know their names. He wouldn't tell me much." Meanwhile, Kiera's analysis yielded unexpected results. "James, you need to see this," she said, beckoning him into the lab. Under the bright lights, she pointed to her findings. "These peanuts aren't ordinary. There are traces of a substance I've never seen before. It's not on any of our databases." He leaned over the lab table. "Could it be a new drug?" "I considered that," she replied. "But the composition doesn't match anything known. It's anomalous." James felt a chill. First a missing kid, now this mysterious clue. "Keep digging," he urged. "There has to be an explanation." That evening he walked the streets where Tyrone was last seen. The glow of neon signs reflected off puddles, casting distorted colors onto the pavement. Locals watched him with guarded expressions, whispering in hushed tones. A group of teenagers loitered near a corner store. James approached calmly. "Evening, gentlemen. I'm looking for information about Tyrone Bennett." They exchanged glances. One of them, a tall boy with a scar above his eyebrow, smirked. "Why you asking us?" Just doing my job, James replied evenly. Any of you seen him lately? Another boy shrugged. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't. What's it to you? James reached into his pocket, pulling out a card. If you think of anything, give me a call. As he walked away, he heard them snicker. Watch your back, detective, one called out mockingly. Back at the station, James mulled over the day's events. There was an undercurrent here he couldn't ignore, a sense that Tyrone's disappearance was part of something larger. Kiera interrupted his thoughts. I found a possible lead, she said, holding up a report. There's an old legend about certain symbols used by underground groups in the city, rituals that involve everyday objects arranged in specific patterns. Are you suggesting this is some kind of cult? James asked skeptically. I'm not sure yet, she admitted, but we can't rule out any possibilities. James sighed. This just keeps getting stranger. As night deepened, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The city's lights stretched out before him as he gazed from his office window, a sprawling expanse teeming with life and secrets. He made a silent vow to find Tyrone, unaware of just how deep the rabbit hole would go. The morning sun pierced through the narrow gaps between the city's skyscrapers, casting elongated shadows onto the streets below. Detective James Williams sat at his cluttered desk, staring intently at the photographs spread before him. Images of the Peanuts, arranged in a perfect circle, nagged at his thoughts. There had to be a connection he was missing. His phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. Williams, he answered. Detective, it's Kira. I think I've found something. Can you come down to the lab? I'm on my way, he replied, already standing and grabbing his jacket. In the forensic lab's sterile environment, Kira greeted him with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I ran a more detailed analysis on the substance found on the Peanuts, she began, leading him toward a microscope. It's unlike anything documented. But here's the odd part. I found trace elements consistent with materials used in ancient rituals. James raised an eyebrow. Ancient rituals? Involving peanuts? She nodded. Well, legumes and nuts have been used symbolically in various cultures. But what we're seeing here is specifically tied to certain West African traditions that were carried over during the transatlantic slave trade. Some of these practices have persisted in secret societies. He leaned against the counter, absorbing the information. Are you suggesting that Tyrone's disappearance is linked to some kind of underground cult? Kara hesitated. I wouldn't jump to cult just yet. But there might be a group reviving these old traditions. It could be a form of cultural preservation, or something more sinister. James rubbed his temples. This just keeps getting more complicated. She offered a sympathetic smile. I did some digging into unusual activities in the area where Tyrone was last seen. There have been reports of gatherings late at night, chanting, drum beats, that sort of thing. Sounds like we've got ourselves a lead, James said. I'll check it out tonight. As dusk fell, James found himself parked on a dimly lit street near an old warehouse. The building, long abandoned, bore the scars of graffiti and decay. He watched as figures slipped through a side entrance, their movements swift and discreet. Keeping a safe distance, he followed. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed. Candles cast flickering light across the space, illuminating symbols painted on the floor and walls. A rhythmic drumming filled the air, mingling with the low hum of voices chanting in unison. James pressed himself against a pillar, observing. At the center of the room stood a figure he recognized, Kyle Baker, a notorious gang leader known for his ruthlessness. Kyle raised his hands, and the crowd fell silent. We honor the old ways, Kyle intoned. Through these rituals, we gain strength and protect what is ours. James's heart pounded. This was more than gang activity. It was a convergence of crime and mysticism. He watched as an ornate bowl was brought forth, filled with peanuts, resembling those found at the crime scene. One by one, participants approached, taking a peanut and murmuring a pledge before consuming it. James stealthily took out his phone, capturing what footage he could without drawing attention. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Looks like we've got an uninvited guest," a menacing voice whispered. Before he could react, two hefty men seized him, dragging him into the open. The drumming ceased, and all eyes turned toward him. "Detective Williams?" Kyle Baker greeted with a cold smile. "What brings you to our humble gathering?" "Out for an evening stroll," James replied calmly, masking his tension. Kyle chuckled. "Curiosity can be dangerous. You should know that." "I'm investigating the disappearance of Tyrone Bennett," James said, eyes narrowing. "I have reason to believe you might know something about it." Kyle's expression remained unreadable. "Tyrone, such a promising young man. Shame what happened to him." "What did you do?" James demanded. Kyle waved a hand dismissively. "You're in no position to ask questions?" He leaned in closer. "But perhaps we can come to an understanding." Before the situation could escalate, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. James used the distraction to break free, pushing past the startled crowd. He sprinted toward the exit, the shouts of his pursuers echoing behind him. Once outside, he ducked into a nearby alley, heart racing. He needed to get back to the precinct and analyze the footage. This was bigger than he had anticipated. Back at the station, James and Kira reviewed the video. "This is unbelievable," she whispered. "They're performing actual rituals." "With Kyle Baker at the helm," James added, "we need to find out how this connects to Tyro." Kira paused the video on a close-up of the bowl. "Wait, look at this symbol." She pointed to an intricate design etched onto the bowl's surface. "Do you recognize it?" James asked. She nodded slowly. "It's an Adinkra symbol from Ghana. It represents power and unity." James frowned. What is a West African symbol doing in a gang ritual here? These symbols and traditions were often used by enslaved Africans to preserve their heritage, Kiera explained. Over time, some of these practices blended with other cultures and went underground. "So Kyle is harnessing this to strengthen his control," James concluded. "But how does Tyrone fit into this?" Kiera tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Maybe Tyrone stumbled onto their operation. Or perhaps he was recruited and had a change of heart." James sighed. "Either way, he's in danger. We need to find him." Just then, his phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. "Hello?" A hesitant voice spoke. "Detective Williams?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Marcus. I heard you're looking for Tyrone." James sat up straight. "That's right. Do you have information?" A pause. "I might, but it's not safe to talk here. Tell me where we can meet." "There's a diner on 5th and Elm, midnight. Come alone." The line went dead. Kara gave him a concerned look. "Are you sure that's wise?" "I don't have much choice," James replied. "This might be our only lead." Midnight found James seated in a dim corner booth of the nearly deserted diner. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air as he waited. The door jingled, and a young man entered, glancing around nervously before approaching. "Detective?" he asked quietly. "Marcus?" James gestured for him to sit. "What do you know about Tyrone?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "We were friends. He got involved with Kyle's group, but he didn't like what they were doing." "Go on," James urged. "They're into some heavy stuff, rituals, sacrifices. Tyrone wanted out. He said he found something that could expose them." "Did he tell you what it was?" Marcus nodded. "He mentioned a ledger, a record of their activities, contacts, everything. If you find it, you can bring them down." Do you know where it is? I hid it somewhere only he would think to look. Check his old locker at the community center. James stood. Thank you, Marcus. You've done the right thing. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. I have to go. If they find out I talked to you. I understand. Be careful. As James left the diner, he felt a mix of hope and urgency. The community center was a short drive away. When he arrived, the building was dark, but a side door was unlocked. Navigating the corridors by flashlight, he found the row of lockers. Tyrone's was marked with faded stickers and graffiti. Using a set of lockpicks, James carefully opened it. Inside, beneath some old books and a tattered backpack, was a worn notebook. Flipping through the pages, his eyes widened. Names, dates, transactions. Evidence that could dismantle Kyle's entire operation. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. James snapped off his flashlight, pressing himself against the locker. Well, well, Kyle's voice drawled from the darkness. I had a feeling you'd show up here. Lights flooded the corridor as several of Kyle's men appeared, blocking any escape. James clenched his fists. It's over, Kyle. I have everything I need to put you away. Kyle laughed coldly. You think a little notebook will stop me? You're meddling in affairs beyond your understanding. Before James could respond, a figure emerged beside Kyle. Tyrone. But something was different. His eyes held a distant, almost haunted look. Tyrone, James called out. Are you okay? Tyrone gazed at him blankly. I'm where I need to be. Kyle placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You see, Detective, some paths are chosen for us. Anger flared within James. He's just a kid, Kyle. Let him go. It's too late, Kyle replied. He's embraced his role. James knew he was outnumbered, but refused to back down. This ends now. Kyle smirked. Take him. In an instant, the men advanced. James fought valiantly, but a blow to the head sent him crashing to the floor. Darkness swallowed his vision as Kyle's echoing footsteps faded. Hours later, James awoke in a dimly lit room, hands bound. The throbbing pain in his head reminded him of his situation. As his eyes adjusted, he saw Kira tied up beside him, unconscious. Kira, he whispered urgently, wake up. She stirred, blinking groggily. James, where are we? That sure looks like they've got us both. She groaned softly. They grabbed me outside my apartment. James surveyed the room, a basement with no windows and a single door. We need to find a way out. Footsteps approached, and the door creaked open. Kyle entered, flanked by Tyrone and 2 guards. Comfortable? Kyle taunted. James met his gaze defiantly. What do you want? I told you before you should have walked away. Now you leave me no choice. He gestured to Tyrone. Our young friend here will perform the ritual. Your interference ends tonight. Tyrone stepped forward, avoiding James's eyes. I'm sorry, he murmured. Kyle, this is madness, Kira interjected. You're deluding yourself with these rituals. On the contrary, Kyle replied coolly. These customs have empowered us for generations. You, with your limited perspective, cannot comprehend. As the guards prepared the space for the ceremony, James's mind raced. They had to escape, but his restraints were too tight. Just then, a loud crash sounded from upstairs, followed by shouting. Kyle's expression shifted to one of irritation. Stay here, he ordered his men. I'll handle this. As he exited, the guards exchanged uncertain glances. The commotion grew louder. A fight had broken out. Seizing the moment, Kira fumbled with a hairpin she'd managed to keep hidden. Hold still, she whispered, working on James's bindings. Within seconds, his hands were free. He quickly untied Kira, and together they overpowered the distracted guards. Tyrone, come with us, James urged. The boy hesitated, conflict evident in his eyes. "I can't. They'll never stop." "Yes, they will," James insisted. "We can protect you." Tyrone swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay." They made their way toward the exit, weaving through the chaos. It seemed that Marcus had rallied some allies to stage a rescue, a fact James silently thanked him for. Emerging into the night, they didn't stop running until they reached the safety of the precinct. In the days that followed, the evidence from Tyrone's notebook led to a series of arrests. Kyle Baker and his inner circle were charged with a multitude of offenses, their grip on the city's underworld finally broken. Tyrone was placed under protective custody, beginning the process of rebuilding his life. James checked in on him regularly, offering support and guidance. Kira continued her research, uncovering more about the rituals and working to dismantle the lingering influence of such groups. As for James, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The shadows that hid such darkness ran deep within the city's veins. But for now, a semblance of peace had been restored. One evening, as he and Kira walked out of the precinct, she asked, "Do you think we've truly made a difference?" He looked up at the stars barely visible against the glow of the city lights. "We took down one network. There will always be others, but every step forward counts." She smiled softly. "I suppose that's all we can do." James nodded, "And we'll be ready for whatever comes next." They parted ways, each contemplating the road ahead. The city remained a complex tapestry of light and shadow. But perhaps, for tonight, the scales tipped slightly toward hope. Days turned into weeks since the arrest of Kyle Baker and his associates. The media buzzed with headlines about the takedown of one of the city's most notorious gang leaders. Detective James Williams was hailed as a hero, but accolades meant little to him. Something still felt unfinished. Sitting in his office, James shuffled through paperwork, trying to tie up loose ends. Despite their success, reports of strange occurrences persisted. Whispers of gatherings in forgotten parts of the city, unexplained symbols appearing on buildings, and, disturbingly, more arrangements of nuts found at various locations. His phone rang, breaking his train of thought. "Williams?" he answered. "Detective, it's Kira," came the familiar voice. "I think you should come to the lab. There's something you need to see." "On my way," he replied, grabbing his coat. At the lab, Kira greeted him with a strained expression. "I've been analyzing new samples from those nut arrangements found around the city," she began. "Look at this." She led him to a microscope, pointing to an image on the connected screen. "These substances are similar to what we found before, but they've evolved. It's as if they're adapting, or being manipulated, in ways that defy conventional science." James frowned. "What are you saying?" She took a deep breath. "I consulted with a colleague who specializes in ethnobotany and ancient rituals. She believes these substances could be part of a larger, more intricate practice, a kind of alchemy rooted in forgotten traditions." He crossed his arms. "I thought we put an end to this when we arrested Baker." Kira shook her head. "Kyle was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There's a deeper network at play here, one that spans beyond our city." Before James could respond, an officer hurried in. "Detective, there's an urgent call for you, line 2. James picked up the phone. "This is Williams." "Detective," a tense voice whispered. "It's Marcus." James's grip tightened on the receiver. "Marcus? What's going on?" "It's about Tyrone," Marcus said hurriedly. "He's gone." James exchanged a concerned glance with Kira. "What do you mean, gone? He was under protection." "I know, but he left. He said he needs to put an end to this himself." James felt a knot form in his stomach. Did he say where he was going? He mentioned something about the source and ending the cycle. I didn't understand, but he seemed determined. "Stay where you are," James instructed. "We'll come to you." He hung up and turned to Kira. Tyrone's missing. He's trying to confront this on his own. Kira grabbed her coat. Then we need to find him before he gets in over his head. They met Marcus at a quiet cafe, a safe distance from prying eyes. He looked anxious, eyes darting around as if expecting trouble. Tell us everything, James urged. Marcus sighed. After everything that happened, Tyrone couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. He kept talking about dreams, voices calling to him. He felt responsible, like he had to stop it. Voices? Kira asked gently. Did he mention anything specific? He talked about an old place beneath the city, Marcus replied. A temple or chamber connected to the old subway lines. He said that's where it all began. James exchanged a skeptical look with Kira. An underground temple? Kira pondered. It's not impossible. Many cities have forgotten tunnels and chambers. If these rituals have been going on for generations, they might have a central location, a hub for their activities. Then that's where we need to go, James declared. Marcus shook his head. It's dangerous. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. James placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've done the right thing by telling us. We'll find him. Armed with blueprints of the city's underground tunnels, James and Kira ventured into the depths below. The air grew damp and musty as they descended, the sounds of the bustling city fading into a distant echo. They navigated the labyrinthine passages, guided by Kira's flashlight and James's determination. Strange markings appeared on the walls, symbols matching those found in the rituals. These are Adinkra symbols, Kira noted, tracing her fingers over the carvings. But some are different, modified. James examined them closely. What does it mean? They could represent a blend of traditions, she speculated. An evolution of ancient symbols adapted over time. They pressed on, eventually reaching a large iron door adorned with intricate patterns. It creaked open, revealing a vast subterranean chamber bathed in an eerie glow. At the center stood an ornate altar surrounded by candles and offerings, nuts, beads, and other artifacts. Hooded figures chanted in a language neither of them recognized. Then they saw him. Tyrone stood before the altar, eyes closed, arms outstretched. "Tyrone!" James called out, his voice echoing. The chanting ceased as all heads turned toward them. The atmosphere thickened with tension. A figure stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal an elderly man with piercing eyes. "You should not have come here," he intoned. "We're here for Tyrone," James asserted. "This ends now." The man shook his head slowly. "You do not understand. The boy has been chosen. He carries the lineage of those who came before. Through him, the balance will be restored." Kira stepped forward cautiously. "What do you mean? What balance?" The man's gaze shifted to her. "Our people were torn from their homeland, their traditions suppressed. We seek to reclaim what was lost, to empower our community against those who oppress us." By performing dangerous rituals, James challenged. "You're putting lives at risk." The man smiled faintly. "Change requires sacrifice." Tyrone opened his eyes, a strange light reflecting within them. "Detective, Kia," he spoke calmly. "I've made my choice." "Tyrone, you're being manipulated," Kira pleaded. "You don't have to do this." He shook his head. "I've seen things, truths about our history, our pain. If I can help heal these wounds, maybe I can make a difference." James felt a mix of frustration and concern. "Not like this. There are other ways to bring about change." The man raised his hands and the followers began to close in. "I'm afraid you cannot interfere." James and Kira exchanged a quick glance. They were outnumbered and unarmed. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the entrance. "Stand down!" A group of officers stormed in, led by Captain Rodriguez. "We've been tracking suspicious activity in the tunnels," the captain announced. "Everyone is to disperse immediately." Chaos erupted as the followers scattered, disappearing into the shadows. The elderly man glared at James. "This is not over," he warned, before melting away into the darkness. In the confusion, Tyrone attempted to slip away, but James caught up to him. "Wait." Tyrone turned, conflicted. "Why can't you understand? This is bigger than us." "Maybe so," James conceded, "but you're still a kid with your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away on something that could destroy you." Tyrone's shoulders sagged. "I'm just tired of feeling powerless." Kira approached gently. "Real power comes from within. The choices you make, the actions you take, to help others without harming yourself." He looked between them, the veil of conviction lifting from his eyes. "I don't know what to do." "Let us help you," James urged. "Together, we can find a better way." Back at the precinct, Tyrone provided a full statement. The network was more widespread than they had imagined, with ties to various organizations across the city. The revelation prompted an extensive investigation into the hidden societies operating under the guise of cultural preservation. As the days passed, James and Kiera worked tirelessly, collaborating with community leaders to address the underlying issues that allowed such groups to flourish. Programs were implemented to support at-risk youth, offering alternatives to those who felt disenfranchised. Tyrone became a key figure in outreach efforts, sharing his experiences to help others avoid the same pitfalls. With guidance, he began to heal and rebuild his life. One afternoon, James visited Mrs. Bennett's home. She greeted him warmly. "Detective Williams, please come in." He stepped inside, the familiar scent of home cooking filling the air. Tyrone sat at the kitchen table, studying. "How are things?" James asked, smiling. "Better," Tyrone replied. "I'm back in school and I'm volunteering at the community center." "That's great to hear," James said genuinely. "I'm proud of you." Mrs. Bennett placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "We're both grateful for everything you've done." James nodded. "Just doing my job." Later, James and Kiera met at their favorite coffee shop. The mood was lighter, the weight of recent events beginning to lift. "Feels like we're finally making progress," Kiera remarked, sipping her latte. "It does," James agreed, "but there's still more to be done. The roots of these problems run deep." She looked thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what that man said. The idea of reclaiming lost heritage. There's value in preserving culture, but not through harmful means." "Agreed," James said. "Maybe we can work with community leaders to create programs that honor traditions in positive ways." Kira smiled. "I like that idea." As they planned, the sense of purpose reignited within them. They were more than just law enforcement. They were agents of change, capable of making a lasting impact. That evening, as James walked the streets of his city, he noticed subtle differences. Murals depicting unity adorned once neglected walls. Community gardens replaced vacant lots. There was a sense of hope, blooming amid the concrete. He thought about the journey, how a series of mysterious nut arrangements led to uncovering deep-seated issues. The path had been fraught with danger and uncertainty, but in the end, it brought about awareness and the potential for healing. Pulling his coat tighter against the cool night air, James looked up at the stars peeking through the urban haze. The challenges were far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt optimistic about the future. His phone buzzed. A message from Kiera. "Meeting with community leaders tomorrow at 10 a.m. See you there." He typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." With a renewed sense of determination, James continued down the sidewalk, ready to face whatever came next. Weeks had passed since Detective James Williams and Kira Smith had tackled the underground network that threatened to engulf young lives like Tyrone's. The city seemed calmer, but James knew better than to take the peace at face value. Beneath the surface, currents still moved. The remnants of secret societies and the echoes of ancient rituals persisted. One evening, as James was preparing to leave the precinct, Kira appeared at his door. Her expression was a mix of urgency and concern. "James, we need to talk." He gestured for her to come in. "What's on your mind?" She closed the door behind her. "I've been continuing my research into the symbols and substances we've encountered. I came across something disturbing." James leaned forward. "Go on." She pulled out a folder filled with photographs and documents. "These are satellite images and reports of similar ritualistic activities happening in cities across the country and even internationally." He raised an eyebrow. "You think this network is global?" "I'm certain of it," she affirmed. "The patterns are too consistent to be coincidence. And there's more. Tyrone's ledger hinted at communications with groups overseas. They might be planning something significant." James felt a chill. "Have you informed the captain?" "Not yet," she admitted. "I wanted to discuss it with you first. This could be bigger than anything we've dealt with before." He nodded thoughtfully. "We need to act fast. If this network is connected globally, we can't tackle it alone." Just then, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me where it all began." James showed the message to Kira. "It's from Tyrone." Her eyes widened. "What does he mean?" He grabbed his jacket. "I think he wants to meet at the community center, the place where we found his notebook." Night had settled over the city as James and Kiera arrived at the abandoned community center. The air was thick with anticipation. Inside, they found Tyrone pacing nervously. "Tyrone," James called out softly. He looked up, relief washing over his face. "I'm glad you came." "What's going on?" Kiera asked gently. Tyrone took a deep breath. "After everything that's happened, I've been digging deeper. I found out that the network is planning a major ritual, one that could have catastrophic consequences." James frowned. "What kind of consequences?" "They believe that by performing this ritual simultaneously across key locations worldwide, they can awaken a dormant power, something ancient and uncontrollable." Kira exchanged a worried glance with James. "Do you know when and where this is supposed to happen?" He nodded. "Tomorrow night, at midnight. The main ceremony here will be in the underground chamber we found before. The other locations are connected somehow." James clenched his jaw. "We need to stop this." "I want to help," Tyrone insisted. "I know the rituals, the symbols. They trust me. I can get you inside." Kira hesitated. "It's too dangerous." James considered the risks. "We can't let him do this alone. But we need a solid plan." Back at the precinct, they assembled a team of trusted officers. Captain Rodriguez was briefed on the situation, his expression grave. "This is unprecedented," he remarked. "I'll coordinate with federal authorities, but time is short." James outlined the plan. "Tyrone will accompany us to the site. We'll go in undercover, gather evidence, and prevent the ritual from taking place." "Understood," the captain agreed. "But proceed with caution. We can't afford any missteps." The next night, they descended once more into the city's depths. Tyrone led the way, clad in attire befitting a participant of the ceremony. James and Kira followed closely, disguised and prepared. As they approached the chamber, the sounds of rhythmic drumming and chanting echoed through the tunnels. The air was electric with energy, both intimidating and enthralling. Inside, the chamber was more elaborately decorated than before. Intricate patterns adorned the walls and floor. illuminated by the glow of countless candles. The atmosphere was tense, a mix of reverence and anticipation. The elder who had confronted them previously stood at the forefront. His voice resonated as he addressed the gathered followers. "Tonight, we reclaim our destiny. Through this convergence, we shall awaken the power long denied to us." James and Kira positioned themselves strategically, observing and recording the proceedings discreetly. Tyrone moved to join the circle, catching the elder's eye. "You have returned," the elder acknowledged. "Do you accept your role?" Tyrone swallowed hard. "I do." Then stepped forward. As the ceremony intensified, Kira whispered to James, "We need to disrupt this before it's too late." He nodded subtly. "On my signal." The elder began chanting in an ancient tongue, and the followers echoed his words. The air grew heavy, and a low rumble seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath them. James gave the signal. He and the officers moved swiftly, revealing their presence. "This ritual is over," James declared, his voice cutting through the chants. A chaos ensued. Some followers panicked and fled, while others attempted to block the officers. The elder stood his ground, eyes blazing with defiance. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion," he shouted. Kira approached the altar, attempting to extinguish the central candle that seemed to be the ritual's focal point. The elder moved to intercept her, but Tyrone stepped in. "No more," Tyrone said firmly, facing the elder. "This isn't the way." The elder's expression softened momentarily. "You, of all people, should understand our struggle." "I do," Tyrone admitted. "But harming others won't heal our past. We need to build a better future, not destroy the present." The elder hesitated, conflict flickering across his features. "It is too late." Kira seized the moment to douse the candle with a fire extinguisher she had concealed. Instantly, the rumbling ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Realizing the ritual had been disrupted, the elder let out a cry of anguish. "You have condemned us," he said. James approached cautiously. "No. There are other ways to honor your heritage, ways that don't involve endangering lives." The elder sank to his knees, the weight of thwarted conviction bearing down on him. "You cannot comprehend the depths of our loss." James knelt beside him. "Maybe not entirely, but I want to understand. Help us find a path forward that respects your traditions without causing harm." In the aftermath, several participants were taken into custody, while others were offered support and resources. The federal authorities dismantled the international network, thanks to the evidence gathered. Tyrone's bravery was acknowledged, and he became a bridge between the authorities and the community, fostering dialogue and cooperation. Months later, community programs flourished, celebrating cultural heritage through art, music, and education. The city began to heal, slowly mending the fractures that had long divided it. One sunny afternoon, James, Kiera, and Tyrone attended the opening of a cultural center dedicated to honoring the diverse histories of the city's inhabitants. The building stood where the old community center once was, a symbol of renewal. "This is incredible," Tyrone remarked, his eyes reflecting hope. "You played a big part in making this happen," Kira said, smiling. He shrugged modestly. "I just wanted to make things right." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did more than that. You helped change the course of many lives." As they mingled with the attendees, the sound of laughter and music filled the air. Children dashed about, families shared stories, and artists displayed works inspired by their rich cultural backgrounds. The elder approached them, now a part of the center's advisory board. He extended his hand to James. "Detective Williams, I owe you an apology and gratitude." James shook his hand warmly. "No apologies necessary. I'm glad we could find common ground." The elder nodded. We have much work ahead, but together we can forge a path that honors the past and embraces the future. Kira joined them. It's amazing what can be accomplished when we listen to one another. They all stood together, watching as the community came alive with unity and shared purpose. That evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a golden hue across the skyline, James reflected on the journey. The challenges had been immense, the dangers real, but the outcome was a testament to resilience and cooperation. He found himself at peace, knowing that while darkness would always exist, so too would light, and it was up to people like him, Kira, and Tyrone to keep that light shining. As he walked home, the city's sounds became a harmonious symphony rather than a chaotic cacophony. Change was possible. They had proven it. Reaching his doorstep, James looked back at the cityscape one last time before entering his home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, there was contentment. Epilogue. In the months and years that followed, the city's transformation became a model for others. James continued his work as a detective, but with a renewed focus on community engagement and preventive measures. Kira advanced in her career, using her expertise to bridge the gap between science and society, advocating for responsible and ethical applications of knowledge. Tyrone pursued higher education, eventually becoming a community leader dedicated to empowering youth and preserving cultural heritage through positive outlets. The echoes of the past were honored, but no longer shackled the present. The nuts, once symbols of hidden power and secret rituals, were now featured in art installations and educational programs, representing growth, nourishment, and the interconnectedness of all people. The city, once plagued by shadows of its own making, stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when individuals chose understanding over conflict and action over apathy.